On the morning of March 1st, 2026, a VHF radio broadcast cut across the Persian Gulf on Channel 16, the international distress frequency. The voice was calm, deliberate. It belonged to an officer of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The message was simple. All vessels are prohibited from transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Any ship that attempts passage does so at its own risk. Within hours, the oil tanker Skylight was struck by a projectile. The MKD VYOM took a hit from an explosive drone boat. Off the coast of Bahrain, the US-flagged Stena Imperative was hit twice while sitting in port. By March 4th, the IRGC declared complete control of the strait. 20% of the world's daily oil supply gone in a sentence. It wasn't a surprise exactly. For decades, analysts had warned that the Strait of Hormuz was the single most dangerous bottleneck on the planet. That if it ever closed, really closed, the global economy would feel it before the evening news. But warnings are easy to ignore when tankers keep moving. Now, they weren't moving. More than 300 ships sat stranded in the Persian Gulf, unable to leave. Brent crude oil surged past $100 a barrel, then kept climbing, hitting $126. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon and didn't stop. The most powerful navy in the world was asked to fix it. And for the first time in modern memory, it said no. Not yet. The strait was too dangerous. Even for the United States Navy. This is the story of why. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz is so dangerous, you first have to understand what it actually is, and why there's nothing else like it on Earth. The strait sits between Iran to the north and Oman and the United Arab Emirates to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf, the body of water that holds a staggering share of the world's proven oil reserves, to the Gulf of Oman, and from there, to the open Arabian Sea. It is the only maritime exit for oil produced in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE. The only way out. At its narrowest, the strait is just 21 miles wide. But that number is deceptive, because ships don't sail across the whole width. They follow a traffic separation scheme, 2 shipping lanes, each roughly 2 miles wide, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Inbound traffic hugs the Omani side. Outbound traffic takes the Iranian side. The navigable corridor for a supertanker is not 21 miles. It's 6 miles. At most. In 2024, an average of 20 million barrels of oil passed through this corridor every single day. That is roughly 20% of global petroleum consumption. 1/5 of all the oil burned on the planet, funneled through 6 miles of water bordered by Iranian mountains on one side and Omani desert on the other. It isn't just crude oil. Around 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas trade transits through Hormuz, primarily from Qatar, which sits inside the Gulf and has no alternative export route that avoids the strait. And here is the critical detail that turns geography into vulnerability. There is almost no way around it. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West pipeline, which can move about 5 million barrels a day to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. The UAE has a smaller pipeline that runs to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. Combined, these alternatives can bypass the strait with perhaps 2.6 million barrels per day of spare capacity. Against a daily flow of 20 million barrels, that is a rounding error. 84% of the crude oil transiting the strait goes to Asia, China, India, Japan, and South Korea account for 69% of all flows. These are the economies that power global manufacturing, global shipping, and global growth. If Hormuz closes, the shockwave doesn't start in the Middle East. It starts in Shanghai, in Mumbai, in Seoul, and it arrives everywhere else within days. No other choke point on Earth carries this much energy through this little space. Not the Suez Canal, not the Bab el-Mandeb, not the Strait of Malacca. Those are problems. Hormuz is a dependency, and dependencies by definition are fragile. On paper, there is no naval contest between the United States and Iran. The U.S. Navy is the most powerful maritime force in human history. Its Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Manama, Bahrain, is responsible for the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the surrounding waters. At full wartime posture, it draws from carrier strike groups, guided missile destroyers, cruisers, amphibious assault ships, submarines, and maritime patrol aircraft. In early 2026, multiple carrier strike groups were either in the theater or surging toward it, including the USS Harry S. Truman, the USS Abraham Lincoln, and later the USS George H.W. Bush. An American carrier strike group is a floating air base surrounded by some of the most sophisticated missile defense systems ever designed. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries up to 96 vertical launch cells loaded with a mix of Tomahawk cruise missiles, standard anti-air missiles, and ASROC torpedoes. Aegis combat systems track hundreds of targets simultaneously. F/A. 18 Super Hornets can strike deep inland. The surveillance network includes P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, MQ-4 Sea Triton drones, and satellite imagery updated in near real time. On any given day, the U.S. Navy could project more destructive power into the Persian Gulf than most nations possess in their entire military. But the Strait doesn't care about tonnage. Iran's IRGC Navy, a separate force from the conventional Iranian Navy, was built specifically for one purpose: to make the Strait unpassable. They don't need to win a fleet engagement. They need to create enough chaos, enough risk, and enough cost that no one wants to transit. Their tools are designed for asymmetry. Hundreds of fast attack craft, many less than 15 meters long, swarm in packs from concealed coves along Iran's mountainous northern coastline. They carry rockets, short-range missiles, machine guns, and in some cases, mines that can be dropped at speed. The IRGC operates anti-ship cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, hidden in caves and tunnel complexes that honeycomb the coast. Shahid series drones, cheap, expendable, and effective, can be launched from deep inland and reach a ship in the strait within 5 to 10 minutes. Then there are the mines. Iran has stockpiled thousands of naval mines, contact mines, influence mines, moored mines, and has practiced deploying them from fast boats, fishing dhows, and even midget submarines. A single mine costs a few $1,000s. Clearing one costs millions and weeks of painstaking, dangerous work. This is not a force built to defeat the U.S. Navy. It's a force built to punish anyone who tries to use the strait. So the strait closes. Oil stops flowing. The world economy shudders. And the obvious answer writes itself: send the Navy. Send the carriers. Send the destroyers. Blast a corridor through and escort the tankers home. America has done this before. In 1987 and 1988, during the Iran-Iraq War, the U.S. Navy ran Operation Earnest Will, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers under the American flag and sailing them through the Persian Gulf under armed escort. It worked. Iran was outgunned and outclassed. When the frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine in April 1988, the Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis, sinking the Iranian frigate Sahand, destroying the missile boat Joshin, crippling the Savalon, and wiping out 2 oil platforms in a single afternoon. The lesson seemed clear. When America commits its fleet, the strait opens. But that was 1988, and the math has changed dramatically. Today, Iran's IRGC doesn't line up frigates for the U.S. Navy to shoot. It hides behind asymmetry. Its anti-ship missiles sit in tunnels that can survive airstrikes. Its mine-laying boats are indistinguishable from civilian fishing traffic until the moment they drop their payload. Its drone swarms don't need to penetrate Aegis, they just need to overwhelm it with numbers and angles. A destroyer can intercept missiles, but it cannot simultaneously sweep mines, counter drone boat swarms from multiple bearings, and manage GPS disruption, all while sailing through a 6-mile corridor at escort speed. That's the problem. Every capability advantage the Navy holds was designed for open ocean warfare. The strait is the opposite of open ocean. There's also the question of scale. During the 1988 tanker war, the U.S. Navy had nearly 600 ships. Today, the fleet hovers around 290. The missions have multiplied. The fleet has not. Ships that might escort tankers in the Gulf are simultaneously needed in the Red Sea, the South China Sea, and the Western Pacific. And then the economics. Top commodity analysts have estimated that the cost of a single escort mission through the strait, including the warship, the air cover, the minesweeping, the logistics, would exceed the value of the cargo it's trying to protect. Senior Navy officials described the Strait of Hormuz in early March 2026 as an Iranian kill box. Not a phrase the Navy uses lightly, not a phrase designed for press briefings. It was a statement of fact. The strait, at that moment, was too dangerous for the most powerful navy in the world. If the obvious answer, steam in and escort, doesn't work, then what does? The real strategy isn't a single bold strike. It isn't a fleet surging through the strait in formation. It's slower, less cinematic, and far more complex. It is a layered degradation campaign, designed to systematically take apart Iran's ability to threaten the waterway before a single tanker re-enters it. Phase 1 is strike warfare. Before the Navy thinks about escorting anything, it targets the sources of the threat. That means sustained air and cruise missile strikes against IRGC coastal missile batteries, drone launch sites, command and control nodes, tunnel entrances, radar installations, and fastboat staging areas. This is what Operation Epic Fury was designed to accomplish. Carrier-launched F divided by a -18s, B, 2 bombers flying from Diego Garcia, Tomahawk salvos from destroyers and submarines, all aimed at reducing Iran's ability to launch coordinated attacks on the strait. But degradation is not elimination. Iran built redundancy into its coastal defense system for exactly this reason. Missiles are prepositioned in multiple tunnels. Drone assembly happens in dispersed workshops. Fast attack boats can be launched from any cove, any beach, any dock along hundreds of miles of coastline. You don't destroy this network in a week. You grind it down over weeks and months. Phase 2 is mine countermeasures, and this is where the timeline stretches. Naval mine clearance is one of the most painstaking operations in modern warfare. The U.S. Navy deploys Avenger-class mine countermeasures ships, MH-53 Sea Dragon helicopters towing minesweeping sleds, and increasingly unmanned underwater vehicles designed to find and neutralize mines without risking human divers. But it is slow. A single square mile of water can take days to clear to an acceptable confidence level. The strait's shipping lanes cover significantly more than that. In March 2026, the U.S. destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels to prevent further mine deployment. But the mines that were already in the water, or might be, still had to be found. Every mine that remains is a potential headline. A single tanker striking a mine doesn't just destroy a ship. It destroys confidence. And confidence is what makes shipping lanes function. Phase 3 is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance (ISR), the invisible architecture of control. P-8A Poseidon aircraft fly continuous loops over the Gulf, scanning the surface with radar, electro-optical sensors, and sonobuoys that listen for submarine activity. MQ-4C Triton drones orbit at high altitude, providing unblinking wide-area surveillance. Submarines lurk beneath the surface, monitoring IRGC communications and tracking small boat movements. Satellites update the operational picture in near real time. The goal is to see everything. Because in a 6-mile-wide corridor surrounded by hostile coastline, the only way to escort a tanker safely is to know, with near certainty, that the path ahead is clear and the threats on both flanks are suppressed. Phase 4, the actual escort, comes last. Only after the strike campaign has degraded Iranian capacity, the mines have been cleared to an acceptable threshold, and ISR confirms a manageable threat level will destroyers begin to move tankers through the strait in organized convoys. Even then, it won't be a return to normalcy. It will be a military operation, every transit a calculated risk, every convoy a potential engagement. As Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane put it, it's a tactically complex environment. Before we take anything through there at scale, we want to make sure we do the work to do that safely and smartly. That work is not measured in days. It's measured in months. So what does this look like? In real terms, when the shooting starts and the strait becomes a war zone. The first phase is the initial closure. It happens fast. IRGC fast attack craft fan out from coastal bases along the Iranian shoreline. Some carry mines. Others carry rockets and machine guns. A few are rigged with explosives, unmanned surface drones on one-way missions. Within hours, the first merchant ships are hit. Drone boats slam into tanker hulls. Anti-ship missiles arc out from concealed positions along the mountainous coast. VHF warnings flood the airwaves. Commercial shipping stops immediately, not because every ship is attacked, but because insurance companies pull coverage the moment a vessel is struck. Without war risk insurance, no tanker moves. Without tankers, no oil flows. Iran doesn't need to sink a fleet. It needs to sink one ship in the right place, and the market does the rest. The second phase is the American response, but it doesn't begin in the Strait. It begins hundreds of miles away. B-2 stealth bombers and carrier-launched strike packages hit Iranian coastal defense nodes. Tomahawk missiles fly from destroyers and submarines positioned in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The targets are IRGC missile storage tunnels, drone depots, radar sites, communications hubs, and fastboat pens. The goal is to degrade the threat before the Navy enters the kill box. But here is where the complexity deepens. Iran fires back. Ballistic missiles target the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. In February 2026, the base was struck. Fires erupted, casualties were reported, and the Navy was forced to pull vessels out of Bahrain entirely. That's a paradigm shift. The forward operating base that has anchored American naval power in the Gulf for decades became a liability overnight. The third phase is the mine problem. Iranian mines, laid by fast boats, fishing vessels, and possibly midget submarines, begin appearing in or near the shipping lanes. Some are old-fashioned contact mines. Others are influence mines, triggered by a ship's magnetic or acoustic signature. The U.S. Navy deploys mine countermeasure ships and unmanned systems to clear them, but the work is agonizingly slow. One mine found restores a sliver of confidence. One mine missed, and a tanker hits it, erases it all. Meanwhile, more than 300 commercial vessels sit trapped inside the Gulf. Their crews wait. Their cargo depreciates. Their owners bleed money. Every day the Strait stays closed, the global oil market tightens further. Brent crude, which started the crisis around $70, surges past 126. The fourth phase is suppression and corridor creation. Over weeks, sustained strikes reduce the IRGC's ability to launch coordinated attacks. Mine clearance teams work channel by channel through the shipping lanes. ISR assets build a continuous surveillance picture. Slowly, painfully, a corridor begins to form. Not a safe corridor, a survivable one. Destroyers take positions on the flanks. Helicopters fly overhead, scanning for fast boats and floating mines. Electronic warfare systems jam GPS spoofing attempts. Convoy operations begin, a handful of tankers at a time, moving at reduced speed, surrounded by warships operating at maximum alert. And even then, the risk doesn't disappear. It merely becomes manageable. A drone launched from a hidden site, a mine that evaded the sweepers, a fast boat that slips through the surveillance net. Each transit is a roll of the dice, weighted heavily in America's favor, but never certain. This isn't a battle in the traditional sense. There is no decisive fleet engagement, no moment where the enemy surrenders. It's attrition, slow, grinding, expensive attrition, in the most consequential 6 miles of water on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a military problem. It is an economic pressure point that connects to almost everything. When those 20 million barrels per day stopped flowing, the impact cascaded instantly. Oil-dependent economies in Asia, the ones that receive 84% of the Strait's crude, faced immediate supply crunches. China, India, Japan, and South Korea scrambled to tap strategic reserves and source alternatives. But there are no real alternatives at that volume. Not on that timeline. The global oil market was designed around the assumption that Hormuz stays open. When it didn't, the architecture broke. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon within days, and the U.S. only imports about 500,000 barrels per day through the Strait. The price surge wasn't about American supply. It was about the global benchmark. Oil is priced on a world market. When 20% of supply vanishes, every barrel on Earth becomes more expensive. Every consumer, every airline, every shipping company, every manufacturer, all of them feel it. Gulf Arab states were forced to cut production. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait declared force majeure on contracts they could no longer physically fulfill. Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports, which heat homes across Asia and Europe, came to a halt. The economic damage measured not in billions, but in the tens of billions per week. And the geopolitical consequences run deeper still. Allies who depend on the Strait, Japan, South Korea, India, must now ask whether the United States can actually guarantee their energy security. That question undermines the credibility of American power projection in ways that no aircraft carrier can answer. If the Navy cannot keep the Strait open, what does forward presence actually mean? The Strait of Hormuz revealed something the world already knew but refused to price in: that the entire structure of global energy trade rests on a 6-mile-wide corridor bordered by a hostile coastline. That corridor has now been closed, and reopening it is not a matter of firepower. It's a matter of time, tolerance, and a level of sustained military commitment that even the United States finds difficult to maintain indefinitely. This isn't a crisis with an off switch. It's a reckoning. But here's the part few people are talking about. The Strait of Hormuz will eventually reopen. The mines will be cleared. The convoys will resume. Oil will flow again. The price at the pump will come down slowly, and the world will exhale. But nothing that made this crisis possible will have changed. Iran's coastline will still overlook the strait. The IRGC will rebuild. The tunnels will be restocked. The fast attack boats will be replaced. The mines will be manufactured again. And the 6-mile corridor will still be the only exit for a fifth of the world's oil. The next time, and there will be a next time, the question won't be whether the U.S. Navy can handle the strait. It will be whether the world can afford to depend on it at all. That's the real strategic question no one wants to answer. Can the global economy survive on a choke point that a single regional power can shut with drones, mines, and fast boats? Technologies that get cheaper and more capable with every passing year? The Navy can win the battle. It always could. But winning the battle is not the same as solving the problem. And the problem, the brutal geography, the asymmetric math, the irreplaceable corridor, isn't going anywhere. If this breakdown gave you a sharper understanding of why the Strait of Hormuz matters more than any other waterway on Earth, subscribe.